On May 7th of 2019, I went to school. I was finishing up my freshman year of high school. I had just gotten my learner's permit to drive. The world was kind of exciting. And yeah, I remember looking at the clock. It was 1:50. I had an hour left in my day. And I remember thinking, awesome, I've got an hour left in my day. And all of a sudden we're going into lockdown drill. And I was like, okay, whatever, not a big deal. But 5 minutes turned into 10, 10 turned into 15, 15 turned into 20. And that's kind of when I was like, I don't think this is a drill.
Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a licensed therapist, author, and mental health advocate. On today's show, we're having a conversation with a young lady named Ellie Wyse, who tells her story of surviving a school shooting and how that experience of trauma informs her future as a therapist or counselor. She's currently a psychology major at Cedarville University and has quite a harrowing tale to tell us. But with me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maillard. How you doing, Duck?
I'm good. I'm reinvigorated. We have had some youthful energy on the show for once in a while. So it's nice to have the youth of America here to talk to us and bring the median age down a little bit.
There's always like a host of conflicting feelings when I talk with somebody that much younger than me. It is invigorating. It makes me feel younger in a certain way, but at the same time, it makes me feel really old.
Well, and you said it at one point too. You also are wary of sounding like you're being condescending, being like, you're so young, you don't want to speak down to someone who clearly has had an incredible life experience, but you also want to use the benefit of your experience to be like, let me tell you how things are going to be over the next 20 years. So it's a balance, yeah. But I think we pulled it off.
Yeah, it's a good conversation. And, we're in very different places in life and have different experiences. But, I always love that, to be able to connect with somebody who his particular life experience is different than mine and really kind of like dive into a difficult topic and try to find it's rough. I mean, we haven't talked about this on the show yet. This is the first time we've had a conversation about school shootings, about the kind of trauma you go through in an experience like that. We only, in this conversation, barely scratch the surface, and just in terms of the bigger societal issues around that. We talk more about her experience and some of the relevant issues there. But I think it's a great jumping off point for us, not just in this conversation, but to have more conversations around all of the really complicated and nuanced ins and outs of this issue that's so relevant.
And like you say, we only touch upon like what you're inferring or implying, and what I'm inferring is, the bigger conversation about gun control, mental health, and issues like that. And I would actually use this opportunity to encourage those of you who listen to this episode. As you listen, I'm curious what your thoughts and your takeaways are. You'll see we didn't want to get into a full-fledged debate with a 21-year-old about this type of stuff because it was about her story. But I would be curious to hear our listeners' kind of take on hey, what you said in that episode I don't agree with, or what she brought up, that's the feeling that I have. I'd really be curious to hear our listeners' take on situations like this. So please, if there's an episode that you've ever thought about maybe commenting on or reaching out to us at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com, let it be this one, because I'm really curious about what our listeners think about really big issues like this. So don't hesitate, reach out.
And I would just remind those of you who are listening to this and might consider making a comment that, on this show, we try to foster a really respectful debate. When we have differences of opinions, I believe we can have conversations that are really difficult, but be respectful and actually maybe make some progress in terms of empathizing with each other's point of view. So if you're going to make a point, make it strong, say what you mean, but just be respectful. We love to hear that.
Thank you for adding that. I thought that was, I just assumed that our discourse would be civil and respectful, but yeah, please keep it civil. So I wanted to ask you a question, completely left turn, changing lanes here.
Okay.
Just because something came up the other day for me, and I was thinking about how my acting career got started, and I remember the first paying job I ever got and things like that. And I was curious about you. Do you remember the first time you ever got paid for playing music? Was it with Cars Flowers, or was there a moment before that in an earlier band or anything where you got $10? Or do you remember the first time?
You know what? I mean, It depends on what you mean by getting paid. The early shows that we did were pay to play. So technically we were paying to play. That was the way the Sunset Strip operated in those days, as long as you were willing to purchase tickets and sell them to your friends and family, then you could play at the Whiskey A Go-Go or the Troubadour.
And if you made money on top of what, like, let's say you paid $100 to get tickets, if you sold $150, you got to keep $50?
Yes, exactly. And so I would imagine the first time that we made any money was for that reason, because we sold enough tickets ourselves to make a profit. And I do seem to remember, because I was kind of the manager of the band in those days, being the one who had a big envelope full of cash that, because I was driving around town and delivering tickets to everyone at our school. I had the cash, and then I was like, okay, we got $40. Like, do we just each get $10, or do we put this forward to getting some more cables? And you know what I mean? Like, it was like I was the treasurer and the secretary of state and everything all at once. So I couldn't say exactly when. I would say the first time we got paid or made money. There might have been some cafe show that we make.
All right, then how about when was the first time, like, that as an established band, that you got like an actual like paycheck, or however it worked? I don't know.
Well, there's a few stories that leap to mind. When you sign a record deal, I don't know what it's like these days, but back then, this was the 90s, and it was still kind of the era of the bloated music industry where they just had a ton of money they were throwing around and spending $1 million to make a record. You hear these stories of $1 million contracts, and I doubt that's the case these days, unless it's somebody who already has like millions of followers on Instagram or something, and they're just a sure thing. But back then, we got signed to a pretty hefty deal. I don't know if it was the most lucrative ever, but it was big enough that there was an advance. And I want to say that we each netted like $30,000 or something like that, which was, when you're 18 years old, is a pretty hefty paycheck.
Right.
And so we got that money, and I don't know, at that age, obviously that sounded like a lot of money. I think the first thing that I did, I had money. The only money that I had in savings at that point was from my bar mitzvah.
Oh.
In LA, bar mitzvahs, especially at the school that I went to,
big business.
Bar mitzvah, big business. You got everyone in your family comes out and slips that. You get that little envelope with the and it's at that point in your life, at 13, it's a couple grand is like.
Yeah.
I thought I was set for life. But being me and being my dad's son, of course, first thing I did was start a bank account and put all that cash in there. And it was just sitting there waiting for the right time. I think when I got that big check for $30,000, I was like, okay, I think I could spend
the bar mitzvah money.
The bar mitzvah money now. So the first thing I bought was a new stereo system for my hand-me-down car. So I had this junky 1983 Jeep Wagoneer that was a hand-me-down from my parents that I was, it had stickers of Alice in Chains and Tool and Primus all over the back of it, and everything was falling apart on that car.
I can smell it now.
Yeah. And then I put in this badass sound system with a subwoofer and a big amplifier and everything.
In the back, like the whole subwoofer in the back, like the crate and stuff.
No, it wasn't that crazy, but it was, I think it had a CD changer.
Did it have a removable face so you wouldn't lose? Yes, of course.
It did. And then everyone loses the face at some point, right? I didn't, as you can imagine.
No, you didn't all buy new instruments? I would assume that's the first thing a band would do when they get their first big event.
That wasn't part of our advance. That was something that was also in the contract. I remember they gave me a new drum set. After we made the record, and of course when we made the record, we were using all of I had a drum tech. My drum tech was this guy, Mike Fasano, who you met, right?
I think so.
Did you meet Mike?
I think
yes. at the NAMM convention, right? Yeah, he was Green Day's drum tech. He actually played in Warrant for a while, I think, or Poison or something like that. And he worked with Rob Cavallo on a lot of that stuff. He worked on Use Your Illusion, I think, with Guns N' Roses.
Wow.
And so he had all this gear. He had a whole crate full of snare drums, and he had this awesome pork pie drum kit, which I only knew pork pie because Tim Alexander from Primus used pork pie.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, we're using pork pie on this record. This is getting really in the weeds.
I just wanted to know when you first got paid.
But after we made the record, I remember I went with Mike, and we went to Guitar Center. We went to a vintage store. He said, pick out a drum set. And that's, that turquoise sparkle kit
Yeah.
that I still have to this day. So that was another perk of that. But yeah, no, I also remember when we first got our first actual like publishing check after touring for years and just, an advance is one thing. To actually get the fruits of success is a different thing. We were in Las Vegas in 2003, I guess. And we got the the news that our first publishing check was going through. I don't know if it was at the time that we'd sold a portion of our publishing, or it was a quarterly statement that was coming in on Harder to Breathe, our first hit. But I just remember my first thought was, oh, I can't wait to invest that or put it as a down payment on a mortgage.
Nerd.
And Adam was like, when can we get cash out of our ATM so we can go gamble? Because we were in Las Vegas. And I was like, of course, that's the difference.
The difference in mindset, yeah. Well, my experience wasn't nearly that exciting. I went to an audition with my then girlfriend, not my wife, who's, by the way, my wife's birthday is today, so happy birthday, sweetheart.
Happy birthday, Jess.
29 years old today. She looks wonderful. Yeah, I went to an audition with my girlfriend who was older than me. So she was already living in New York. I think I was visiting from college, and it was for a music video, and they were just looking for like interesting people. And I was like, yeah, I'll audition. And I went in and I did this. I did this and with the biceps, got the biceps bouncing. And then like 3 months later, I got a check in the mail for $50 and a copy of the video. And I had made the cut and my girlfriend didn't, sorry. And I remember the feeling. I remember being like, I just got paid to be an actor. Like I knew it was $50 and it was stupid and it was this little dumb thing. I think it was like a Christian inspirational music video. It's called I Can Hear the World Singing. I can't find it. I've searched on YouTube. But I remember the feeling of accomplishment and a feeling of like, I might even have a leg up on all these, because I was still in school and I was like, these kids are all just student actors. I'm a professional actor. It was a very seminal moment for me. I remember that moment. So that's why I was curious if you had a similar one. And of course, yours is $30,000 and mine's $50,000. But whatever. Hey, the sentiment's the same.
Hey, you made a lot of money in your career.
Damn right.
Commercials and everything. Maybe
look
not.
Look at this palace. Look at that guitar. Yeah. So
no, you are in the very small minority of
right.
actors who have been able to sustain a whole career and mortgage and everything off of your act. So you should be very, very proud of that. That's
thank you.
It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. So, well, let's get into our conversation, shall we? I mean, not to switch gears back to a more of a somber topic, but it is a pretty heavy conversation. But I think we got a lot of great points out. All three of us talking about the trauma of a situation like that.
Yeah, and I think we probably should give a little trigger warning here and say we're going to be talking about something that obviously is, even if you haven't had an experience like living through a school shooting, we go into pretty specific detail in terms of the feelings that come up when you're in a terrifying situation and how that can affect you in the long run in terms of PTSD. So if you have issues like that and it's something that's still currently something you're dealing with, you just be mindful that this is something that could bring up some of those feelings.
Yeah.
And if you do have feelings, reach out to someone. If you have a therapist and you're having feelings, reach out to your therapist. If not, a loved one, a parent, a friend, somebody that might understand and might be able to give you a little bit of support. We can get through these things together if we kind of look for that support. So,
and if nothing else, take some inspiration from Ellie, who has not dealt with it, but who has overcome kind of those obstacles with such grace and such maturity for someone of her relatively young age. So it's a very impressive conversation.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into it. Without any further ado, here's our conversation with Ellie Wyse right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Hey, if you like what you're hearing on this episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast, take a moment and subscribe to the show, press that like button, and leave a comment in the comments section. If you want to reach us directly, you can also email us at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com. Now back to the show. Ellie Wyse, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing great. It's nice to see you out here advocating and talking about your experience. And I'm curious, I would love for our listeners and viewers to kind of get to know you a little bit before we jump into kind of the meat and potatoes of what we want to talk about today. But have you been doing this a lot? Is this something have you been on a lot of podcasts? Is this a new thing for you?
I just got out of a news interview like 20 minutes ago. So guess I'm kind of well versed in doing this now.
If nothing else, your voice is warmed up. So that's nice.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah.
Well, I watched one interview that you did, I think on Cedarville Stories, and I noticed that you have a lot of poise on camera and on mic, and that's, you're in college still. That's pretty cool that you have, that's a talent that not everyone has. So congrats on discovering that.
Thank you.
And also the resources of, what's clearly a pretty nice podcast studio that's allowing you to get this kind of training and this experience. That's a cool skill to have, especially for someone who wants to maybe go into that advocacy later on.
Yeah.
So you're a senior at Cedarville University? Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yes, I'm a senior at Cedarville. Yeah.
And you're studying psychology. Tell me about that passion, how that came about.
I mean, I assume we'll talk about it a lot more, but my experience in high school and just kind of what I went through in high school with the shooting and with COVID and everything kind of exposed this really big gap for teenagers in counseling settings and teenagers being able to access mental health care. And so I want to go into that to kind of fill that gap and help those who need to be helped. Yeah, it's been really good to be here.
And now Cedarville is a religious school as well as Christian school, right?
Yep. Cedarville is a Baptist university in, southwestern Ohio.
In terms of psychology, obviously we associate as being, well, it's under the sciences, and we talk about it in terms of scientific terms. Your religiousness, your faith, do those things come in conflict at all, or have you found a way that those things coexist well?
Yeah, Cedarville does a really good job of integrating psychology with a biblical worldview, because psychology is very much at odds with kind of what the Bible says and what the Bible teaches. So I have had a wonderful experience being here. I've learned a lot about kind of what I need to know, but then also balancing that with what I believe in my faith and how, I view the world and all that stuff. It's been very good to find that happy medium that you mentioned and kind of walk that balance.
I'm curious, what are the things that, like you say, are at odds with religion in general, with psychology? Are there specific points that you kind of constantly find yourself bumping up against?
I mean, a lot of psychology is kind of based on Freud, and a lot of just kind of generally, I don't want to say necessarily problematic, because some of it is correct. Like you said, it is a science, and there is some stuff that is absolutely true about psychology. But there's just kind of like some small details about specific theories and things like that kind of do start to fall apart a little bit and become a little bit problematic. That doesn't mean that they're not worth learning. It just means that you need to be very careful with how you explore those theories and those options.
So do you see yourself as somebody who's going to be working and counseling with people within a Christian context, and your psychology studies are a complement to that, or the other way around, or how does that sort of jive together? I'm not really sure what I want to do with that as of right now. My heart's kind of always been in the secular sector and helping people who just kind of going into the world and being a light in the darkness, because there's a lot of darkness in the world. So I'm not really sure if I want to go into the secular sector. I know it's going to be harder for me in the secular sector for sure, but there is a lot of value to going into the Christian sector. Like I said, it's harder to go in the secular sector. So I would be able to kind of implement my beliefs a little bit more with my practice if I go into a Christian setting versus the secular setting. So I'm not entirely sure what I want to do. It'll kind of depend on where I'm led. Why is the secular sector harder?
Just because psychology is so at odds, both scientifically and socially. A lot of secular counselors are very kind of anti-Christian in a lot of ways. So it's just interesting to kind of navigate that struggle. Yeah.
Okay. So difficult for you just in terms of where your belief system is and your emphasis and how to make that work. So, okay, let's back up a little bit and kind of get the context for all of this, because you've had quite a journey so far in your young life, and you grew up in Colorado originally. Is that right? Or you went to school in Colorado?
Yeah, we moved to Colorado in 2009, right before I started kindergarten. So we've been there most of my life. Yeah.
Was your Christian faith always a part of your life growing up? Was it? Yeah.
Yep. I was raised in a Christian household. We went to church every Sunday, very strong Christian parents. I came to saving faith when I was, I think, 6, baptized at 8, kind of the whole 9 there. Can't say my walk with the Lord has always been super consistent and strong, but for right now it is.
So around right when you started high school, as a freshman in high school, something really traumatic happened. And what was your worldview at that point? I just kind of want to understand, like, how a moment like that can affect somebody that young in terms of were you an innocent person? Had you not experienced anything traumatic in your life? Were you somebody that saw the world as a kind and friendly place? Were there already things that compromised that in your life before that? Or what kind of a kid were you at that age?
At 14, I'd kind of experienced, I don't want to say like super intense trauma. I will say I did see the world in a largely positive light, but I did know that bad things happened. It wasn't like I was just kind of blissfully ignorant. I was very aware that, I was aware that school shootings happened. I was aware that people get hurt. I was, and people do bad things. I saw that and I knew that, but I still largely saw the world as a good place and people as good.
You were aware of it to the extent that at this moment in history, you have drills for this kind of thing in class, right? You have things to prepare you for a moment like that. So was this something that was commonplace that you did regularly in your school, or what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, part of how I found out was I thought it was a drill. I mean, we do drills so often. If you go to a school building, you do a lockdown drill probably once a month. So it was just instinctual at that point. The lockdown drill PA came over the system and we all just went to our spot. It wasn't like this big panic. It was just kind of like, oh, here's another drill. But it was not another drill. And it was interesting to navigate that. Yeah.
So take us through that day, if you don't mind, just so our listeners can kind of get a sense of what that was like and what you went through. Tell us how that day transpired and what happened.
Yeah. On May 7th of 2019, I went to school. I was finishing up my freshman year of high school. I had just gotten my learner's permit to drive. The world was kind of exciting. And yeah, I remember looking at the clock. It was 1:50. I had an hour left in my day. And I remember thinking, awesome, I've got an hour left in my day. And all of a sudden we're going into lockdown drill. And I was like, okay, whatever, not a big deal. Like I said, lockdown drills are only about 5 minutes. Usually they kind of just make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then they end the drill and kind of come unlock the doors, all that stuff. But 5 minutes turned into 10 turned into 15 turned into 20. And that's kind of when I was like, I don't think this is a drill. And I texted my mom and I was like, this lockdown drill is going on way longer than it normally does. And she said, no, there's an issue. And I started getting texts from friends asking if I was okay, friends from outside of the school asking if I was okay, because I was involved in like youth group and things like that. And they were all like, are you good? And I was like, yeah. And I remember I went on the news and I looked up my school and it was just like the Wikipedia page. It was nothing, like there was nothing. And I refreshed the page and all of the news stories came up and it was all like shots fired at STEM School Highlands Ranch. And I was like, oh, so that was kind of how I found out. And then
So pause there for 1 second. I think we all have had moments in life where we realize something bad has happened, or maybe not to that level, but that chill that comes over you, that sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize, or you think something bad might be happening. What happens in that moment for you? Are you numb, or do you have this terror that comes through you? What did you feel when you realize you're in the middle of a lockdown active shooter situation?
Yeah, I remember it a little bit. I remember I was hyperventilating. I'm not sure if it was a full panic attack, but I was definitely like, I was freaking out. I was not okay. And I had a friend who wasn't really a friend, but we kind of went to school together for a long time. It's a K-12 school, so I'd been there since 6th grade. And she had also been there since 6th grade. So we were aware of each other. And she grabbed my hand and she told me it was going to be okay. And I was like, I don't know that it is. 'Cause there's an active shooter, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen.
Now, at this point, did you know anything about who the shooters were, or did you have any information about what was going on?
We did not. So actually, by the time we were released from the building and evacuated, they had 2 in custody, which we now know is how many people were in the building committing the shooting. But they thought there was a 3rd. And I remember my dad being really upset that they let us out of the building without having all 3 in custody. So by the time we left the building, we weren't sure if there was 2, we weren't sure if there was 3, we weren't sure if we were safe. It was just kind of a big question mark.
So you're still, it sounds like you were still terrified even as you're leaving the situation. Even you don't know that this is a safe situation to be leaving the classroom, to be trying to get out of there.
Yeah, I mean, there was that, and then it was compounded by the fact the school is kind of in the middle of a business center, and so there were like snipers on the tops of the buildings around, and we were given very explicit instructions about when we could put our hands down, things like that. So it was very like, if I make a wrong move, even the people who are supposed to be helping me could end up hurting me if I'm not careful. So I was on very high alert at that moment. Yeah.
What makes this even more complicated, I imagine, for you is that in retrospect, you realize that you knew one of these shooters, that this was somebody that was in your social circle at school. When did you find that out, and what was your reaction to that?
So I found out that day. It was, let's see, we'd left the building and we were, after being moved around a whole bunch, we were finally at the reunification center. It was a rec center that was kind of down the street from the school. It was the only space that could hold all of the students and get them back to their parents. The only people who were allowed to leave on their own were the 18-year-old seniors. So all of the rest of us had to wait for our parents to come get us. And that was a very long, arduous process. But we all had our phones. And at that point, the suspects had both been named. And so it was pretty early on in waiting in that reunification area that we realized that this was somebody I knew. I was actually with a friend, and he looked at me and he said it was this person. And I was like, there's no way.
What was that moment of not only do I know who it is, but I have a relationship with this person? There must be some conflict in there, and sort of like, how can someone I know and someone that I think I have a handle on the type of person they are do something like this? What's that realization like?
I was in complete shock, disbelief. There was no way this person could have done, at least in my mind at the time, could have done something so awful. This person had mental health issues, but this person, as far as I knew, was also seeing a therapist and was also seeing a counselor and was also having a lot of intervention by the school. And like, people were keeping their eye on this person. So, it was just weird that the whole thing could have happened.
This is kind of a broader, bigger issue that I hesitate going too far down the road on, because I want to stay on your story. But this is a new topic for us that we're kind of venturing into on the show, and there's a lot of ins and outs to how we talk about these things that I think are relevant. And so I do kind of want to ask you, there's always the debate when these things happen about guns and mental health. And you hear kind of from all sides of the political spectrum, people say, well, we need to be focused on keeping guns out of the hands of people that have mental health issues. And we kind of all agree on that. We should, dangerous people shouldn't have the means to do terrible things. But as somebody who is in the mental health world, somebody who is mindful of how we talk about psychology and the ways that we stigmatize things, I always react to that kind of like with a little bit of hesitance, because I think, well, what do we mean when we say guns and mental health? Like, are we referring to anyone who has any kind of mental health issue, which is all of us, really? Right. We all have something we're dealing with that's challenging in terms of how we navigate the world with our mental health and how we take care of our mental health. So are we specifically describing somebody who has, a psychotic disorder or a personality disorder? There's a lot of ways that you could be defining that, and what kind of people we're saying we want to keep guns out of the hands of. So as somebody who knew this person, without delving into them too specifically, Do you think that there were signs that we could have known? I mean, like, how do you look at somebody and say that person shouldn't have had access to guns? Now, obviously, this is a minor, and there are other things at play here. But if it's somebody that at that point in your life you didn't think could have done something like that, how do you reconcile that as somebody who's studying psychology now? How do you understand the idea that there's some way that we can prevent this sort of thing? Like, can we tell that somebody like that had potential to do something like this?
Especially considering that they, as you say, were already receiving treatment and counseling. So clearly there were enough warning signs of an issue, maybe not related to guns or anything, but that someone said, hey, there should be some intervention here. So just to piggyback on Ryan's question.
So I do want to start off by saying the guns were owned by one of the shooter's parents and were being stored safely. So that, like, gun control in and of itself is not necessarily the correct answer, especially in this case. I want to tread very carefully, but just knowing that the guns were being stored safely and were being stored correctly by the actual owners is kind of important in this whole debate.
I will interject and say, I'm sorry to interrupt. I will interject and say, no matter how safely they were stored, they were obviously still accessible by this child. So safe storage can only go so far.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
The other issue is this person, as far as I know, had made a joke about the shooting and a friend had reported it, and the school intervened and sat down with the shooter and was like, is this something you're actually thinking about doing? And they cleared this person. I don't know what happened, what was said, what was done, anything along those lines. But this person, being as mentally ill as they were, probably should not have been cleared. I don't want to blame the school. I don't want to blame the counselors because it's not really anybody's fault except for the person who did it. But our preventative mental health measures probably need to be upped, and they need to be taken more seriously, especially as we're seeing more school shootings happen. It's very important that if we are going to make this a mental health issue, then we do need to take the mental health of the students incredibly seriously.
Very well said.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree on that. I guess my only hesitance is we have a tendency in our culture sometimes when there's a problem and we're trying to correct it is to overshoot and overcompensate to another extreme. And I would just, as an advocate myself, like to put out there, that if we start stigmatizing every teenager who's going through a rough time, which most teenagers do, and start saying this person is potentially dangerous, we have to be really clear in terms of where that line is and how we're scanning for those things, how we're finding them, how we're treating it, whatever plans we put in place. My personal feeling is we also have to be respectful of how we're treating people and mental health in general, and not just going straight to, well, this person expressed some dark things, therefore they become a pariah, and they become outcast in some way or viewed as dangerous. But that's tough because sometimes you can't tell. Obviously, this is somebody that you had some relationship with, and maybe it's because you were young and you wouldn't really know. There's no way you could have known, and somebody who did have expertise could have known in a way that you couldn't have known. And I think all of us are innocent at one point, hopefully, and assume the best in people. You don't think, even if this person is joking around and saying some dark things, like, you don't want to believe that person is capable of something like that. So Ellie, you leave this situation, you have this realization that this is somebody that you knew. It's, man, I mean, I think we're all putting ourselves in this position and imagining how your world can change in an instant when you go through something like that. So in the immediate aftermath, in the days and weeks just following it, what are you feeling? I don't want to put words in your mouth. What are the emotions, if any? What are you experiencing right after this traumatic event?
I mean, to be honest, really nothing. I was kind of in shock in the immediate wake of everything. And so I really wasn't feeling anything. I mean, I was anxious. I think born of that came my anxiety, but I didn't really feel anything. I was just kind of numb. And it was weird because I expected to be anxious or sad or depressed or any one of a number of things. And so to not feel anything for a good couple weeks was definitely weird.
What about your peers who also went through that with you? Was there any, obviously there's bonding because there's a shared experience, but was there any activism or people who were, I will put words in your mouth a little bit because I think about what I would do in that situation. And I imagine that there's a part of me that would be so angry that, yep, well, I'm now part of that unfortunate fraternity of students who have experienced this. And I would imagine that anger would well up inside me over those following weeks of being like, man, we drill for this and it's so stupid that we have to drill for this. And now here it is. I'm part of those statistics. And man, can't we do something about it? Were any of your fellow students experiencing those feelings and maybe wanting to mobilize and do something, to speak out or anything like that?
There wasn't a lot of activism per se. I will say there was an incident following the shooting. It was the day after. I'm not sure if you know, but one student died. And we had a vigil. He died because he rushed the shooter. So basically him dying saved a lot of lives that day. And so we had a vigil for him that was organized by a separate high school, and it was turned into a political event. And we were made to feel like we were statistics. I know that wasn't necessarily the intention, but they were like, oh, here's another statistic. Here's another instance of adults not doing their job and all of this stuff. And that's not why we were there. We weren't there because we wanted to be part of a gun control rally. We were there because we wanted to remember this person who died to save our life.
Right.
And for it to be turned into that was really heartbreaking. And so after that, there was a little bit of activism for better mental health care, because I think all of us recognized that the issue was mental health deep down. That's really what it boils down to. And the only way to solve mental health issues is to treat them, not to stigmatize them, but to treat them and to give people respect in care and kind of, I'll say prevention, do preventative measures as needed to protect people. Obviously, we don't want to stigmatize people just because they have a mental health issue. A lot, like you said, a lot of us have mental health issues, but just because you have a mental health issue doesn't give you the right to be a dangerous person. Mm-hmm. And so following the shooting, there was not a lot of activism. There was that kind of one instance of mental health activism, but beyond that, we were all kind of just grieving together, and it became a lot more, like you said, of a fraternity. It's unfortunate. Yeah.
Now, you said that born of that came your anxiety. What did you mean by that? Was that something that came later?
Yes and no. There was kind of the immediate anxiety of, this is a place that I was supposed to be safe and I was not safe. And so there is nowhere that's safe. So there was kind of that immediately in the wake, but kind of from that came a lot more of nowhere is safe. It kind of started to settle in a little bit more and become a little bit more deeply rooted and kind of affect my willingness and my ability to go out in public. Thank God for my mom, because I would be agoraphobic if it wasn't for her. So yeah, it was very interesting kind of going through that whole process. Yeah.
What did your mom do? Did she just kind of grab your hand and say, we're going to go out there, we're going to do this, and give you support?
She bribed me to go to therapy.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, she basically, there's a picture of it. I went to a party. One of my brother's friends' moms was hosting a party, and she's just like, let's have the kids get together and have fun, because obviously the world is dark right now. And they had therapy dogs at this party, and this therapy dog hopped up in my lap, and my mom said that was the first time she'd seen me smile in 2 weeks. Mm. And that was kind of when she knew that things were really serious and really bad for me in my head, was kind of coming to that realization. So she was like, you need to go to therapy. And I was like, there's no way. And she was like, what if we get a dog? And I was like, there might be a way. So
that's a lovely segue into the therapeutic process. So I imagine it was a long road for you to get to the place you're at now, where you clearly have some understanding and ability to navigate this without being heavily triggered. You're talking about it openly, and that's amazing to go through something like that terrifying, to be able to talk about it the way that you do. So what was the turning point? Was it therapy? What was that process like for you in terms of in the post-trauma of it, navigating the symptoms that came up and the ways that you have to find some way to find closure on that terrible chapter of your life?
I mean, I'll just start off right out by saying it's still a process. We're coming up on the 8-year anniversary in May, and it's still something that affects me every once in a while. So the healing process, I mean, I said it in the other podcast I did, but is so non-linear. There are some days where I'm doing really well, anxiety is really low. There are some days where I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. It's so back and forth. But I can guarantee that without therapy, I would have no good days. I really needed to go through that, and I really needed to go through the process of actually dealing with what I had been through and treating the following disorders. I was diagnosed with depression, pretty severe depression after the shooting, and I don't even think I diagnostically qualify for depression anymore. So huge blessing, huge improvements in my life. Yeah, therapy was a really good thing for me to go through, as hesitant as I was to go. I was really glad I got that help and got that support from somebody who, I don't want to say knew exactly what I needed, but knew exactly how to deal with what I had been through.
How to figure out what you needed.
Yeah.
I want to amplify that message again, just because you said it so eloquently. Something that you pushed back against and you didn't think that you wanted, but you're so thankful in retrospect that you had someone there to go through that journey with you and figure it out. Didn't necessarily know the answers right away or know what you needed, but took the time and had the conversations to figure that out together with you.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I have to assume that there were some experiences during that therapy that inspired you to go on your current journey of becoming a therapist yourself. Or psychologist?
Probably. I couldn't pinpoint a single one. I think the biggest thing was when she was explaining so I did a specific kind of therapy called EMDR. Stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It simulates your REM sleep. So basically what it does, and I'll explain it the way my therapist explains it, is when you have a traumatic event happen in your life, that memory gets trapped in your amygdala, and your amygdala is your emotion center of the brain. It's in the wrong filing cabinet. EMDR simulates your REM sleep so that you can target a specific memory, process it, and put it in the right filing cabinet, your hippocampus, which is long-term memory. So it moves it from being this highly emotional memory that you can't think about without having this like visceral emotional reaction to something that is more manageable and is more just a fact of your life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think her explaining that to me, I was just hooked. I thought that was so fascinating. I thought that was a really interesting way to think about trauma and think about the way the brain works. And I think that in and of itself kind of set me on the track. I wouldn't recognize that until a long time later, but I think that really set me on the path. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that was the most succinct and clear explanation of EMDR I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of therapists try to explain it, so well done.
Thank you.
So okay, well that's amazing. And EMDR was specifically developed as a trauma way of treating trauma, which was a huge breakthrough, because you can talk about it all you want, but if it's still living in your body and, as you said, filed in the wrong place, you still have those triggers no matter how much you talk about it. I think the other thing to add to that, though, is that we tend to think that there's going to be a day in which it goes away completely. You're not going to have the trauma anymore. The reality is it's going to be a part of your life forever. It's just a matter of how you're relating to it. If you're relating to it as something that is current and in your body in this moment, that you're feeling like you're having a flashback to that moment and experiencing the same terror, which is what PTSD essentially is. Or if it's something, as you said, that's in your memory, that's never going to be a good memory, and it's always going to inform the way that you see the world and navigate the world to some degree, but it's just not going to have the same grip over you in terms of how you relate to it in the present moment. So I think that's helpful for people to understand that distinction that you laid out, because with anything with mental health, it's the goal is not to get rid of it completely. We never get rid of anxiety completely. We never get rid of dark feelings. We go through depressive periods. We all have experiences that can be difficult in life, and how we navigate the world and how we relate to our own mind. It's just, are we doing it in a way that is empowering and allows us to be present for the things in our life today and not stuck in the past or worrying too much about the future. So thank you for sharing that. So then you kind of come out of this dark period in your life, and now you've found this empowering thing in college where you're actually studying psychology and looking forward to a career in that. So how does that begin? Was that something that when you went to school, you declared a major right away and you knew that's what you wanted to do, or was it something you discovered in time?
I jumped around majors that I wanted to pursue kind of all throughout that, like, thinking about it and application period, kind of at the end of high school. I applied for like physics, kinesiology. I applied for education. I applied for history. I applied for marketing. The list goes on. I could not nail down what I wanted to do. It was really bad. One day I sat down in my physics class and I was just like, I was kind of downtrodden about the whole thing, because I was just like, man, this comes so easy. Like, I had so many friends who just kind of knew what they wanted to do, right? I went to a STEM school, so everybody was going into engineering or medicine or some kind of science. Like, they all just knew what they wanted to do. And I'm like, how do you have that clarity, you know? And so I sat down in my physics class, just kind of confused, upset, kind of over the whole process. And I sat down and I looked at my friend and I went, what if I was just a therapist? And she looked at me and she said, I wondered when you were going to come to that. I've always kind of been like the therapist of the friend group. So I guess it just fit. And from there, it just started to make more and more sense. The more I talked to friends and my parents and just kind of everybody in my life about it, it was very like, this is probably the track I need to pursue. So yeah, I applied to Cedarville, undeclared originally, changed my major very quickly. Yeah.
Now, just because we rarely have an opportunity to talk to someone who was in school at this moment, but I want to get your take on the time where COVID took you out of school and the impact it had on you with your mental health, but also your peers and things like that. I mean, you were, a junior in high school at that point?
I was finishing up my sophomore year in March of 2020. I just turned 16 when lockdown started, so it was right on the heels of the shooting. Oh, yeah. It wasn't even a year. It was 10 months. So, oh, man. Yeah, it did not, as you can imagine, do good things for my mental health. I actually, in a paper I wrote for one of my classes, she asked about my history and kind of how that put me on the track to counseling. And I still believe that the COVID lockdown for me was worse than the shooting in a lot of ways. Wow. The shooting was kind of like an instant terror and an instant like event, but it was over so much quicker. I could see the end, even in the middle of it. Like, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, there's kind of only two ways that can end, and one is not great and the other's okay. And so like that one felt like it was heavier because it was more violent, but like as an event, it felt easier to deal with. Yeah. COVID for me was so full of questions and so full of loneliness, and I couldn't see the end at the light of the tunnel. You know, what was supposed to be 2 weeks to slow the curve was 2 years of my life. It just wrecked a lot of the progress I had made with my depression and anxiety specifically. And it was awful. I mean, to going from having a community of people in my immediate vicinity that I could talk to at any time about these issues. Now, all of a sudden, I'm in Zoom classes with these people in front of a teacher. I can't just have like a private one-on-one conversation unless I like FaceTime them separately. And even then, I've got to FaceTime this person instead of actually being present in the room with them for 2 years. It was awful.
I had the same experience, that it wasn't necessarily this situation we were in. It was the unknown. It was, I can do anything for 3 months. Tell me I'm going to have to do this for 3 months and I'll get in the right mindset. This open-ended, this could be this could be our lives forever. This could be 2 years. That drove me completely just over the edge, where I felt like I had nothing to hold on to in the same way. And I had a 5-year-old that I had in my house that I was trying to help navigate it as well. And having that moment of like, but I'm going through it I'm going through the same anxiety. So yeah, I relate so wholeheartedly to that explanation or that description, because it's that not knowing that is so difficult to deal with. Yeah.
And you're both extroverts by nature, right? So your need for the connection with your peers is even greater than an introvert like me, right?
Yeah, it's like oxygen.
Basically, yeah.
So what was it like for you, Ellie, when you finally were able to go back to school and rejoin life as we had known it before this shutdown? Did things go back to normal pretty quickly for you, or was that something that you needed to go through a whole healing process as well?
So going back to school was a process. We kind of ended my sophomore year, and it was kind of like, we hope things will get better to the point where we can have students in the school full time. That was not the case. We ended up going back on a hybrid schedule. So I was in school 2 out of 5 days a week with my cohort, it was just the group of students they put together. I got put in cohort B, so I went to school on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So that was odd. And we did that, gosh, almost all of my junior year. We weren't allowed back to school full time until at least the end of my junior year, like the last month and a half or so, if not my senior year. We did Zoom school for a long time, and it was awful, especially because you've got the students who are in the classroom, like they're in your class, but you never see them because you're in a different cohort. So you've got the people in class and you've got the people online. It was just tough. It was hard to navigate. And then, like I said, it took a whole year. Like, it was just this long process where we weren't sure if we were ever going to go back to school full time. And it was awful. Yeah.
Were colleges sympathetic to that experience at that time? I mean, obviously SATs and transcripts and grades and things were all kind of up in the air. Were colleges in general understanding of those experiences and a little bit more lenient in terms of what they were expecting of their incoming freshmen?
From my understanding, yes. It sounded like colleges were kind of already on the way to phasing out requiring SAT scores. But then COVID, we did see, like, 2020 to I think 2023, we saw huge dips in SAT scores. Students who would ordinarily be able to like outperform are suddenly performing on average levels. And so I think it kind of highlighted an issue that they were already kind of like, we don't really want to do this. So they did stop requiring SAT scores. As far as I know, at least Cedarville, I don't think they still require SAT scores or ACT scores. You can submit them and you can get scholarships for them. That's kind of the purpose they serve now.
Oh, got it.
So, but yeah, I maintained my grade point average. I won't say I thrived, but I think it was more of a distraction to do well in school.
So when you think about counseling young people that are going through traumas or trying to overcome a trauma, how does your experience with those two things, with the school shooting and with COVID, how do those inform the way that you think about helping people? Is it personal experience as much as education that informs why and the what, like how you see yourself helping people?
Personal experience probably, I think it drives the passion, and my education drives how I want to do it. I think that's kind of the best way to explain it, because I am very passionate about what I want to do. You know, I very much want to help teenagers who have been affected by trauma. I would really love to help teenagers who have been affected by violence and help them through those changes in their life. I guess my education definitely serves its purpose, and that is a very big purpose of, you know, understanding how to counsel, understanding how to proceed, and understanding just kind of the process is incredibly important. And I think my education has been so invaluable for everything that I need to know that my personal experience just really drove why I'm doing it.
It sounds like you're focused on helping people that are going through some of the things that you've gone through. Is there any interest or focused on what we were talking about earlier in terms of not the effect so much, but the cause, the people that are potentially, causing these issues? That's a whole other bigger field of psychology that is really intimidating to most therapists, the idea of working with people who are potentially dangerous. Or is there any intrigue because of your experience in that part of things, or is it just focused on helping the people that have been affected?
I am intrigued by it. I also know personally that would be a very big struggle for me. I would very much have a hard time counseling somebody who is thinking the way the shooter was thinking, basically, to boil it down. I mean, I don't want to say it's the exact same or anything like that, but just kind of in that mindset, I would have a very hard time walking them through that. I'm fascinated by those kinds of mindsets. I think it's very interesting. I think there's kind of a conflict of interest there that would not necessarily make me an effective counselor for those people. So I really want to focus on, as much as I hate to say it, like victims and helping them navigate survival after trauma.
I don't think anybody would begrudge you that decision. It's an understandable hesitation. Like you say, it's pretty triggering. And I could imagine professionally, you want to maintain that distance. And if you feel you wouldn't be able to, I think that's a respectable position.
Yeah, I've run into that as a therapist. There's, for the most part, I've heard and seen a lot of things, and I think I'm pretty good at, maintaining neutrality and a non-judgmental stance. And even when people tell me things that I, in my normal life, would find reprehensible, but every now and then something comes up that affects me specifically, in terms of my experience, and is a trigger for me. And as a therapist, first and foremost, you have to maintain your empathy for your client. And if you're losing that, if you're having things that are coming up personally that are affecting your ability to be non-judgmental or to not have any agenda other than helping this person, that can be really detrimental to the therapeutic process. And I know I've had that happen a couple times where I recognize, like, oh, what I'm feeling in this moment right now is not necessarily what they're doing. It's triggering something in me from my past that I'm now bringing into the room. And I think it's very mature of you to say, it's interesting because most people would say, I don't want to do that because I find that those types of people to be a problem for me. You said it, I don't think that I would be able to be a very good therapist in that situation, which is such a professional attitude to be
a therapist thing to say.
Yes, exactly. No, but it is true. We have to know our lane. We have to know where we can be most effective and help people and where we might be more challenged. And so, yeah, as somebody who is a survivor, as somebody who is navigating this in a really incredible way, to be able to pass that on, to pay it forward to people who are going through some of the same things is really an incredible gift. Do you look at it as a gift? When you look back and you see these things you've been through, nobody would wish to go through them, but do you see the gifts that you've been given as a result of it?
Yeah, I do. As much as it's kind of jarring to say it, I would not really trade my experience for anything. I think it's given me a lot of insight. It's given me a passion. It's given me direction. It's given me so much more than it took away from me. I don't think I would want to have a life where I didn't have that. As much as I hated going through it, and as much as I wish nobody else would go through it, because it's awful. It's a terrible experience, and it's a terrible journey to walk through. But I do think, for me personally, I'm so grateful for it.
It's such a great encapsulation of just growth in general. I mean, certainly not everyone would want anyone to have to go through a school shooting or any experience like that. But just growth in general, which we've talked about in this podcast to endless lengths, is often uncomfortable. That's where the growth happens, whether it's fear, whether it's, having difficult conversations and facing up to things that you don't want to be honest about. In retrospect, that's where that growth happens. And that's where you become the person that you will eventually become. So it's an apt metaphor for the kind of overriding message of your story, but also of therapy in general and mental health, and trying to make those improvements where it's uncomfortable, and that's where that growth happens. So So thank you for saying it much more succinctly than I did just there.
So here you are out here. You're doing press. You're doing interviews. You've done podcasts and it sounds like TV, radio, maybe. Where does that fit into everything in terms of where you're at in your life? Or do you see yourself as somebody who's going to be an advocate, and that'll be a part of having a public platform as well as helping people one-on-one? Why is this important for you to be doing at this point in your life?
I think it's important to get my story out there, not because, I'd love to be a mental health advocate, but I also really want people to see the redemption that can come from having a traumatic experience. We live in a society that likes to trap people in the box of their victimhood, and you don't have to live there. You can grow, you can do amazing things, and this part of your life that was at one point such a big part of your life. Like, people like to use the whole analogy of like, it goes from being a chapter of your book to a paragraph, to a sentence, to a word, to a period. And that is growth in and of itself, you know? And so I would love for people to realize that you are not the things that happened to you. You are not, the experiences of your life. They may inform a little bit of who you are, but you don't have to let them hold you back or define you or anything like that. The shooting is such a small part of my life. I think because it's such a small part of my life now, it's a very integral part of my life, but it's such a small part. I think that's why I'm able to talk about it so openly. I'm able to have the passion that I have for it. And I'm able to kind of, I don't want to say move on with my life, but kind of take steps in the right direction.
So what's next for you? Grad school, I imagine?
Yep, I'm going to grad school. I am still applying places, so I don't know what that looks like right now. But yeah, I'm going to go to grad school. I need to get a license to be a therapist, I'm sure you know. And I would really love to, hopefully in the next 5 years, ideally I'd be finishing up a doctorate. Yeah, in the next 5 years, I'm hoping to be practicing, licensed and all. So
I don't put it past you. Just seeing what you've overcome and the work ethic that you have, I fully expect that within those next 5 years. So,
thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really impressive, and to see where you're at and how far you've come, and to be doing what you're doing. And again, like I said at the start, to have the poise. I sound so condescending to say, at your age, I don't know what I expect. You're an adult, but you're doing such a good job talking about this stuff, and I'm sure you'll make a great therapist. And so thank you so much for coming on our show and talking about this stuff and sharing your story. You're right. We do need stories of redemption and hope amidst dark times in the world. And so, sharing your story of redemption and hope is something that I think people will gain a lot from. So thank you for your time and your energy and everything that you do. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was great talking with you today. Thanks.
Yeah,
Ellie.
It was nice to talk to you guys too.
All right, Ellie Wyse has been our guest on today's episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. Check out new episodes every Tuesday. We'll see you next time right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Hey guys, Duck here. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. If you liked what you saw, feel free to go ahead and click the links here on the screen for older episodes, and be sure to subscribe. Click that subscribe button, and then you'll get notification about new episodes as they come out every Tuesday. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Harder to Breathe podcast.